We're breaking the custom.
What is that? Oh, we're breaking the custom. Okay. In order to learn the next Gemara, I just want to tell you that the Sukkim over here say this is Perek Hay in Vayikra. It says if a man sins or a soul sins, he doesn't testify. If he knows testimony and he doesn't testify, or if he touches something tummy, or anything that's tummy, or nevela's kayat meya. Nevela is the carcass of a wild beast, or a nevela of a behemoth meya, a wild of the carcass of an unkosher animal, or a nevela of a sheretz tummy. And if he forgets about it and he's tummy, he's guilty. Or if he touches any tumah of a person, or any tumah, kol tumasei, that he can become tummy with, and he forgets about it, if it's concealed from him and he knows about it, he's guilty. Then it goes on to tell me about if he swears lahara leheter. Basically, these psukim told me that someone becomes tummy and he does something wrong. What does he do wrong? It doesn't say. Because he becomes tummy. One of these ways, he's guilty. Now, what did he do while he was tummy? So the Gemara today starts over on Taner Rabbanan.
So where are we exactly?
On Vavam and Beis, Taner Rabbanan. Taner Rabbanan, it's 10 lines in the bottom. Taner Rabbanan, Taner Nebrais, Minayin. How do you know in those verses that we just read that it's talking about someone that ate a sacrifice while he was tamei, or that he went into the temple that he was tamei? It doesn't say what he did. It just says he's tamei and he's guilty. But what did he do while he was tamei? Impure. Bidinu. How do we know it's talking about what the Gemara thinks it's talking about? How do we know it's talking about that he either ate from a sacrifice or he entered the temple? Because we can get the answer to this logic. Because I know of a negative prohibition regarding impurity, and I also know of a punishment of kares regarding impurity, and I also have the obligation to bring a sacrifice regarding impurity. Well, just like when the negative prohibition and the prohibition of kares was referring to eating from a sacrifice while he was tamei, or entering the temple while he's tamei. So too, the third thing, which is when the person is going to have to bring the sacrifice. The name of the sacrifice is a korban oila v'yored, a sacrifice that has a sliding scale. That sacrifice is also going to be talking about Tamas Mikdash Dasha, which is he is entering the temple, or he's eating from a sacrifice. That's when he's eating from something that's consecrated between the sacrifice, and he has to bring a sacrifice because of that. When it says Ve'ima Truma, 1 second, you're not allowed to eat Truma also if a person is tamei. How do you know it's talking about eating from a sacrifice and entering the temple? Maybe it's just referring to Truma. Truma, which is the food which is separated to the Kohen. Over there, I know also that there's a negative prohibition not to eat Truma when he's tummy, and there's also a punishment of kares. Well, it's not kares actually. Truma is misbidei shemayim. The Gemara says it can't be that because you don't have a misbidei shemayim, that's penalty from heaven, which is different than kares, that comes together with the sacrifice. Usually, a prohibition of kares ends up being a sacrifice, a korban chatas, if it's done b'shoigig. Kares is b'mezid. B'shoigig, intentionally, it's kares. Unintentionally, it's a sacrifice. Here we have intentionally is misa b'dei shemayim. We're trying to say that not unintentionally, it's going to be a sacrifice, but we don't usually have that combination. So therefore, we say it must not be truma. It must be he ate the sacrifice or entered the temple while he's coming. maybe the combination of kares and then a sacrifice. That's if the sacrifice is a real sacrifice, which is a set sacrifice for everyone, whether he's rich or poor. Chatas, regular chatas. That goes together with the intentional kares. If it's unintentional, this kares. Aval, oila b'yared. But when it comes to the sacrifice, which is the sliding scale, the rich bring the animal, the poor bring the meal offering, and the middle bring the bird. They say maybe that maybe we'll have to bring. Just like there's a sacrifice over here, someone swears falsely. He hears the oath. Someone administers an oath to him that he should testify, or if he swears falsely, right? In future, swear, whatever. So then over there he has to bring, the carbon oil of the earth. No, but then there's no kares. So see, the carbon oil of the earth is not set to go along with the kares that's done when it's done intentionally. So therefore, it could be truma because it's carbon oil of the earth. It's not a chata. Oil of the earth is the sliding scale. Oil means goes up, the earth means goes down. It goes up and down. Amar cross. So the Gemara says, "Ba." It says the pasuk "Ba." Let's see. I say Yitzma Ba. It's impure with it. It's an element it's concealed. It says Ba. The Ma'ute Truma is coming to exclude Truma. I have an extra word in the pasuk that's coming to exclude Truma. Gemara says, how do you know that? It just says it becomes tummy, but then how do you know it means that it's excluding Truma? Ema Ba. The Ma'ute Mikdash. Maybe it's exactly the opposite. Maybe it's exactly excluding the same thing, exactly the thing that you wanted to include. And it's referring to Truma, and it's excluding someone that entered the Mikdash. So they say they become maybe someone enters the base of Mikdash when he's tummy, he can't bring the carbon out of the area. Maybe he really needs to bring a chatas kavua, the set sacrifice, which is equal for a poor or rich.
For the past few days, haven't they been discussing that, those two sins, entering and leaving?
And now we're going back and saying, how do we know that that's what it's talking about? Yeah.
Is it? I just saw like more recent you mentioned like another.
That's not referring to these sins.
No, they were trying to like fit another one into it, but it didn't match.
Right. We tried to fit Truma. Truma doesn't match. We have what we were explaining the whole time, that there's two sins. The person's impure. He has to, and he does one of these two things. He has to bring this type of sacrifice, the oil of the earth. What are the two things? He either ate from a sacrifice while he's impure, or he entered into the temple while he's impure. He said, but how do you know that's what it's talking about? Maybe it's talking about Truma. He ate Truma, but that's when he has to bring this carbon. So we said, no, it says Ba. And Ba, it's coming to exclude Truma. It says, how do you know it's coming to exclude Truma? Maybe it's coming to exclude exactly what you're talking about, and maybe it's referring to Truma and excluding that. Hari Rava Alei the Rebbe, Leila Mayim Samukim. Rava announced about Rebbe. He says that Rebbe, he drew water from deep wells. Since Rebbe has a good shot of it. And the Rabbeinu Hananel is not Rava, it's Rav. All right. Rav said about Rebbe. Rav was a student of Rav. Anyway, it says, okay, the Tanya was taught in the rice. Rebbe Yomer. Rebbe says, Ekrani Chaya. Once the pasuk said that if someone becomes impure by the carcass of a wild animal, I would have already understood that the same thing would apply if it became impure from the carcass of a domestic animal. Because Chaya, B'chlal Behema B'chlal Chaya. It doesn't have to say domestic, it doesn't have to itemize all the different types of animals. If it says one, I would know the other one would be the same thing. A dead animal, it gives off impurity. So once it said Chaya, Behema Lamanemra, why did it have to go on and say, or a nevela of a behema, So the Gemara explains, Nemra kan behemoth meya. Over here it says behemoth meya, talking about someone that became tamei because he touched the carcass. Remember la'alon. I'm sorry.
This is part of
This says in Torah, behemoth meya. Talking about this week. Last week was the top, and it's going back to Parshas Vayikra, and now B'Nemar Lahalan is 2 weeks ago. Before Pesach.
There was a difference of like the domestic and the not domestic animal about the sprinkling the blood. One was sprinkled and one wasn't.
You're talking about forbidden fats. The eating the fats are forbidden. So Nemrakan behemoth Nemar Alon, and it says further on, where is that? Someone that eats. It says clearly someone that eats from a sacrifice. Behemoth meya. The pasuk actually says if someone eats from a sacrifice, nefesh kisiga b'chol tamei. If someone touches, we're going to learn touches means eats, but someone touches from, someone that touches anything that's tummy. Or an animal that's a carcass of an animal, and then he goes and eats from a sacrifice. So it says both behemoth meya by us, by the carbon oil of the earth. It says behemoth meya, someone eats from a sacrifice after it became tamei. So we know that it's talking about, because he uses the term behemoth meya in an extra way, it's unnecessary way. It says behemoth meya. It's coming to tell me it's referring to another context where it says behemoth meya. But there, that means that he ate from something that was holy, even though he was tamei. So Ashkesan Tumas Kodesh. So we have one thing here. We have Tumas Kodesh, that if he eats from a sacrifice while he's tamei, but Tumas Mikdash Minolan, how do we know it's referring to entering the temple? We still don't have that detail that entering the temple is what it's referring to, but that he has to bring the carbon oil of the earth. Amar Kra, the pasuk says B'chol Kodesh Leisiga, says that he can't touch anything that's holy. Now, Mikdash Leisavai can't touch anything that's holy, and you also can't enter into the temple if you're impure. Now, just over there, Kodesh means Leisiga means to eat. You can't touch it, actually means to eat. I think the Gemara says it's actually referring to Truma, but let's not get too complicated. So I have Kodesh and I have Mikdash Leisavai. It says it in the same verse. Iskash Mikdash LeKodesh. And there's a comparison between eating something that's holy when a person is impure, also to entering the temple when he's impure. Both of them would bring the carbon oil of the earth, just like behemoth meya, it says by the carbon oil of the earth. And then it says behemoth meya by eating a sacrifice when a person's impure. And it says in the same pasuk, it says eating a sacrifice when you're impure. It says entering the temple when you're impure. So just like the eating brought a carbon oil of the earth that I learned from behemoth meya, so to entering the temple is going to be a carbon oil of the earth. Yihachi trumanami. That's the case. It should be referring to truma as well. Someone eats truma when he's impure. We had the Gemara in Makkos. The pasuk says b'chol kodesh leisiga is referring to that a person not allowed to eat truma when he's tummy. Gemara says hamiyat rachmana ba. Can't do that. He already said this next word ba, which is coming to exclude truma. Maybe the ba is coming to exclude the mikdash. Back to the original question. How do you know it's coming to exclude truma? Dabra mikdash lemamatina. Nah, can't be excluding the mikdash. Why? Because just like eating sacrifice when a person's tummy, there's kares, right? By eating truma, it would be misa. Eating a sacrifice when he's tummy, there's kares. And so too, entering the temple when he's tummy, there's kares, if it's done intentionally. So too, b'shaygig is going to be, by both of those, is going to be a carbon oil of the earth, a sliding scale, the sacrifice.
And those two punishments, they usually fit together.
They do. It's fine. But we're saying that we don't want to exclude entering the mikdash because it has the same punishment as eating from a sacrifice when a person is tummy. Became the karas k'maisa. It's exactly the same. In other words, I would like to do a comparison with things that are already similar. Otherwise, if it's different, then I would say, but no, it's different. You can't compare. The Gemara says, Adarab, on the contrary, truma matinan. You can't exclude truma because truma is the one that's the most similar. Because we were talking about eating the sacrifice when a person's tamei, should be comparable to eating truma when a person's tamei. Both eating. Elam Rava, rather Rava says, Shalish Krisis Bishlamim Lama. It says if someone that eats from a carbon shlamim when he's tamei, it says the term karis 3 times. Punishment of karis. Why do I need it to say 3 times? Achas, one of them is leklal. Tell me the general rule. Any sacrifice that a person eats from when he's tamei, he is going to get karis. Achas leprat. One of them is going to be the detail. Now, over here, Rashi spells this out, very interesting, that it's not a klal and prat klal. It's not a, what we usually say, klal and prat, the general and then the specific. The only thing that's included in the general would be what's included in the specific. So if we limit the general to the specific, that's not what we're saying. We're doing it different. We're saying that there's a klal. And then I have something that's yatzam in a klal, that leaves the general. When something leaves the general, hey, something leaves the general, so it's not coming just to discuss itself, but it's coming to say about the whole rule, right? It's coming to tell you about everything. It's not limiting it. It's telling you, like we have in other places, like we have by Shabbos, that why does it say specifically about not to light a fire on Shabbos? It's going to tell me that just like lighting a fire has its own independent punishment, that in each and every one of the malachas is going to have its own independent punishment, right?
So basically, it's specification that is generalized also.
Yeah, and because it's saying something specific that's leaving the general rule. It's saying this. I could have said I kept this as general, and then I said something specific. So because I'm doing that, I'm coming to teach you about the whole thing. Okay, so now Achas Leprat is coming to tell me that any sacrifice that a person eats from is going to, that if he's impure, he's going to get karis. But it's coming to it's excluding if it's not a sacrifice. If it's kache bedek bias, it's something that's only for the temple fund, but not a sacrifice. Okay. And another thing that's coming to tell me is that there's a tumah that it says in general, but it doesn't say specifically what it's referring to, which I don't know what it is. That's coming to tell me that over there's karas as well. Let's say that must be that it's eating from a sacrifice. That over there's going to be karas as well. In other words, the tumah that it's said by the karban elaviyah, there's going to be karas as well. It says, meaning the tumas kodesh, but I know already there's a karas by if someone eats from a sacrifice. I have a clear psukim about that. The nafkalim the Rebbe, the last Gemara told me behema tmeya tells me that there's karas by the so why do I need that for? So it says Taneu in Latumas Mikdash. It must be referring to, this is the concept of Inyan. I have a special extra teaching, but it's not relevant to what I think I'm going for because that I already have it. So I'll use it for something else that I needed. And that's Tumas Mikdash. Someone enters the temple while he's impure. That over there's going to be karas. 1 second. We need this for Rabavo. Dam Rabavo. Tell us Lama. Why do I need 3 times karas by the shlamim? Before we had Rava saying, now it's Rabavo. Achas leklal. One is for the general. Achas leprat, like we said before, is specific. That is referring to specifically a sacrifice and not the bedek bias. Achas ledvarim shein nechalim. It's coming to tell me about things that are not eaten. means inedible. For example, the wood or the incense, that if someone eats them, even though they're not edible, if someone eats them while he's tummy, there's going to be kares. Okay, so what are you telling me over here that you're using it to teach me the mikdash? I needed to teach me that there's kares by those other things. If someone eats the wood while he's tummy, or he eats the levina, the frankincense, the other incense. Reb Shimon Damar, and according to Reb Shimon, it says according to Reb Shimon, he says there's no kares by eating inedible substances. So, for him, it's coming to include something else. Coming to include the chatas pnimis, the chatas that the blood is brought inside the sanctuary. Which has different halachas, but it's not brought on the outer altar. The blood is sprinkled inside, and then you take the meat and burn it outside there. So I could have thought that it was only referring to those that are brought on the outside altar. It's coming to tell me also chatas pnimis, according to Reb Shimon. I could have thought that anything that the flesh is not brought on the outside altar, that over there there's no laws of pigel. There's only pigel, which is the thoughts of eating it out of its allotted time, right? It's only if the flesh is brought on the outer altar, but not by if the flesh is burned outside the temple, because the blood was sprinkled inside. That is a different category. So I could have thought that just like there's no pigel, there's also no carbon oil of if someone eats from it. I'm sorry. Could have thought that there's no kares. So I know that there's his chayiv kares. Okay. The question now is that what are you telling me that we're learning from Rava's statement that the three creases that it says by Shlamim, one of them is coming to teach me that there's going to be a kares. That there's going to be kares by entering the temple. I need this for something else. I need this to teach me not status pnimis. Yeah, I needed to teach me that the kares is on things that are inedible, or the chatas pnimis according to Reb Shimon. It's not the kares that was extra. It's the fact that it says that there's tumah 3 times by the carbon shlamim, and then he gets kares. But it's not the kares that we're looking at. We're looking at the tumah. And the same, it's like 2 parts of the sentence. So the Gemara says, what are they? Achas l'chlal, achas l'prat, achas l'maksuv, but there's something in the amount. Another one is for the tumah that it says by the carbon alaviyarid, which I don't know what it's referring to. Aviyarid tumas kodesh. It must be referring to the tumas kodesh. Someone eats from a sacrifice, even though he's tummy, meaning tumas kodesh, but that I know already that there's kares over there. The nafkalei the Rebbe, because I learned from Rebbe, where Rebbe said behema tmeya twice. So that's coming to teach me tumas kodesh. So we say, so today in the tumas mikdash, it's coming to teach me that when the carbon oil of Yared was referring to when someone enters into the sanctuary with his stuff. So it's behind nami mi ba'ilei. 1 second. I also need that. I'm using that for something else. Why? I need the boy lemechtav kares look to Ravo custom nami tmeis place I gonna be loud for 1 second. It needed to say kares because of what Rabavo said. Rabavo said that it says it in order to tell me that chayav kares, someone eats the inedible things that are brought in the temple, the wood and the. So therefore, it has to say the word tuma because he's emphasizing the other part of the sentence. But it has to say, because it's talking about kares, it has to say that it was tummy. Elama Rava says no. Asya tumasai tumasai. We're going to learn it from a verbal analogy. By us, it says the word tumasai. And somewhere else is going to say tumasai, and that's going to teach me that it's referring to the temple, entering the temple. Over here it says by the carbon of Yared l'chol tumasai to all or any type of his tumah. Ksiv Hasam, and over there it says when someone enters into the sanctuary, when he's tamei, he is tamei, his impurity is still on him, and it uses the word tumasai. Malal tumas mikdash, just like over there it's referring to the tumah of the mikdash. Avkan tumas mikdash, also here it's referring to entering into the sanctuary when he's tamei. Okay, so we have a verbal analogy, a Gzeira Shava, that teaches me that the Karban Oil of the Yored, which didn't tell me what Aveira he did, it just told me that he's Tameh and he's guilty. What Aveira did he do? So I learned this verbal analogy. It says Tumasai here, and it says Tumasai by someone entering sanctuary when he's Tameh, by the Paraduma that he has to sprinkle on him so it becomes pure. So just like over there was entering the sanctuary, so too by the Karban Oil of the Yored, he was Tameh and he entered the sanctuary, which is the main problem. Yeah, that's when he has to bring the carbon out of the area. So then what do I do with the word ba? Ba was coming to exclude truma, but you don't need it to exclude truma because who mentioned truma? I have a Gzeira Shava that tells me what it's referring to. If I didn't know what it was referring to and I was just learning it from a precedent from somewhere, so it's okay, well, I have to exclude it. But over here, it's Gzeira Shava, what it's referring to. I don't need a pasuk to exclude anything that it's not referring to, because it was never talking about that. It says, L'rabbeis nevela seif tar. It's coming not to exclude, it's coming to include. If he became tamei from eating a carcass of a kosher bird, it's when you over there, the carcass of a kosher bird, the nevela of a kosher bird that died without shchita, the tumah goes on him only when he swallows it, not when he touches it. Very unique halacha. So, but if he becomes tummy because of that, and then he enters into the temple, so the same law will apply. Something to include. It says but you told me before that ba, the word ba, it was coming to exclude, not include. It says mishum de miyutahu, I said, because it's an exclusion, it's also an inclusion. How does that work? It says ksiv because the pasuk says oikiyiga. Or if he touches something that's tamei, the bar nagia, something that you could touch. That's when he's going to bring the carbon, the lav parnagia. But if something that doesn't give off tumah from touching, then he won't. So ksiv ba, but it also says ba, which is a miyuta, which is excluding. So have a miyat all the rabbis. If you have a double negative, it's coming to tell me a positive, and so it's coming to include. Really, the ba was a miyat, but because it's the second miyat that's coming to include, is coming to include that he's going to have to bring a carbon oil of the area if he enters the temple.
Now I see where math gets it.
Okay.
But you know, with negative square roots, a negative square root has a negative square root. There's a number that does this, that has a negative.
Oh, really?
Yes. Well, no, what's the square root of a negative number? That's good. That's good.
It probably won't have.
Alexa.
Something that doesn't. What is this? Serious. What is the square root of the negative number called? An imaginary number.
Imaginary number. What happens today when you walk into an office like a meeting and everyone's got their phones out on the table and you say hello Alexa or Siri, all the phones start talking at once?
Yeah. No, remember sometimes I'd say something and it'd start
That's
answering.
a good trick.
Okay. Yesh b'yediyah b'tchila v'em b'yediyah b'sayif sar nas b'pnim. We mentioned that if a person knew that he was tamei, but in the end he doesn't, then he forgets and he enters into the temple, and then or he ate something that was holy, and he never finds out that he was tamei, that he did that aveira. So the sar anasa b'pnim, the goat of Yom Kippur that's brought, the this week's parsha, there was the lottery. It was a goat that was sent off the cliff, and then there was another goat that was brought in. So that goat that's brought inside is brought as a atonement for impurity that he didn't know about. It says, Tanur Rabbanan was taught in the Brisa. That goat will atone. This is this week's parsha. How appropriate! It will atone for the holies from the impurities of the Jewish people. Yeshli binyan tel avi shalish tumas. Which impurity are we referring to? They have three options. Tumas avodah zara. Maybe it's coming as an atonement for someone that worships idols. Tumas gila arayas. Maybe it's coming as atonement someone that committed adultery. Tumas shvichas damim. Maybe it's coming as an atonement for someone that committed murder, the impurity of murder. So the Gemara says like this: Avodah zara uses the word tuma because it says that you contaminate my sanctuary. By Gila Arayas, by adultery, it says that you should guard my guarding, not to come to do the abominations and don't become contaminated by them. See, it uses the term contamination. And by murder, it says like the Tami Asarts, do not contaminate the earth. See, it uses the word tumah by shvichas damim. Yachal gimel tumas halal asar mechaber. Maybe this goat that's brought inside the sanctuary, maybe that is an atonement for these three types of impurities. Mitumas from the impurities, but veloi kol tumas, but not all the impurities. Which one is it referring to? Which type of tuma is unique, has been separated from the other tumas? I would say it's referring to someone that was tamei and he enters into the sanctuary, or he ate from a sacrifice when he's tamei, because over there he has to bring a unique korban. So too over here, if he never finds out that he was tamei when he did that, he didn't know that he sinned. So instead of punishments coming on him, he doesn't know what happened. The goat of Yom Kippur will protect him from those punishments. Rabbi Yehuda, that's where Rabbi Yehuda is. So where does Rabbi Yehuda learn this from? Me to myself, from their tumah, not all the tumas, specifically that unique type of tumah. Reb Shimon says, what are you saying? Getting to this from this roundabout way, I see it clearly from the text. The pasuk says, "Bechiper ala kodesh mitumos," will atone for the holies from the impurities. Mitumas shel kodesh. I know it's referring to the impurities of the holies. It says clearly, which means it's not referring to avodah zara, gila arayas, shvichas damim. It's referring to someone that entered into the temple. Maybe any sort of impurity it will atone, which probably means even if the person knew about it afterwards. When he's supposed to be bringing a sacrifice, you're going to tell me that he doesn't need to because the goat of Yom Kippur will atone? Where it says, no, from their sins, from their iniquities. The sin similar to the iniquity, I don't know which one is finished. But how do they translate Shayim and transgressions and sins? Transgressions and inadvertent and advertent, rebellious. Okay. We're talking about something just like the rebellious sins. Don't have a sacrifice that comes like sacrifice only brought for inadvertent. Just like the sacrifice, the rebellious sins don't have a sacrifice. Also the inadvertent sins, karban, are types of sacrifices that don't have types of sins that don't have a sacrifice for it. What type of sin would that be? When he never knew that he did the sin. Only when he knows that he did the sin could he bring the sacrifice. Okay, so it's not talking about when he knew about it, he forgot, and then he knew, because then he would bring the korban oil of Yored. For that, I don't need the goat of Yom Kippur. I have the korban oil of Yored. When do I need the goat of Yom Kippur? That's only for sins that there is no sacrifice for. Similar to the sins of rebellious sins, but there's no sacrifice. So what sin would be no sacrifice for if he never found out? There's no sacrifice.
It is similar to the sacrifice that the women would bring after giving birth.
What is that? What's the similarity to that? They know they gave birth.
Okay. It was a different explanation.
Okay. How do you know that this sacrifice will still help? That to protect him from atonement. Let's say he didn't know that he did the sin. He knew originally, but he didn't know afterwards that he did the sin. He knew that he was tummy, but he forgot. He entered into the temple, and then afterwards he didn't find out. But Yom Kippur passed by. So since Yom Kippur passed by, he's still protected from atonement, even though when he finds out, he still has to bring the carbon of the year. But how do you know it still protects him? But it's coming to include people that have to bring sin offering. They're also protected. It doesn't mean that they are exempt from the sin offering.
When we say he forgot, is that like Hesafadas or greater?
That's what it does.
He said,
Let's leave it over here. So tomorrow we'll be up to date.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.